So let's get to the content. So myself, I have no problem telling anybody this. I was a job seeker at 50 and older. I am over 50 years old, and doesn't mean that my journey to employment is going to be the same as you, but I had a lot of the same questions you have, potentially. Uh, Job seeking at any time is scary, but there are some specific concerns the older you get. So we're going to be talking about a few of what we call best practices for job seekers that might be a little bit older. By the way, if you're under 50 and are taking this, a lot of this will pertain to your job search as well. So our goals today here are: one, be able to create a T-table. And this is just a tool we use to help prepare ourselves for interviews and for resumes that allow you to match your skills with those needed on the job description. We'll talk about some of well, not some, three of the advantages of networking. Networking has always been important, but it may look a little different than the last time you job search. There are some new tools available, and we'll talk about specifically about those new tools. We'll understand why it's important to leave off experience and qualifications that go beyond the company's needs, and when to put them on potentially. That seems like I'm giving you two different ideas there, but it'll make sense once we get to that information. And then one of the big ones is to be able to avoid the common pitfalls of being seen as overqualified. And just a heads up, this is something we can take on and successfully prevent in most cases, because it's something we do to ourselves. And then how to keep your successful momentum of the job search going for as long as it takes. And just a heads up, if you're putting questions into the chat feature, Niquila will turn her camera on when there is a question for me, and we'll get to a couple questions every couple slides or so, but be aware that she is monitoring the chat for your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. Before we get to the good news, just before we get there, we're going to have you put something into the chat. And I'm going to give you the last part of this slide first. Please only put into the chat what you would say in an interview. So keep it professional, obviously. But the first thing I want you to do is, before we get started, let me hear one word, just one word from you that describes job searching over 50. And again, don't use any word you wouldn't use in a professional interview. So I'm going to take a look at the chat and just see what we have here. Intimidating, confusing, frustrating, challenging, tough, hard, limited, overwhelming, exciting. Oh, we usually get a couple of good ones. All the above, different, yep. Complicated. Be aware that these words are words that someone may use in any point in the job search. We'll be talking about those things specific to the older job seeker, but looking for work is scary. It scares me. I've been doing this for 25 years, quarter century. I've been helping people find work. And you think, well, I would go into a job search with no fear. It's absolutely not true. It's a scary process for me. I've looked for work in the last 25 years 4 or 5 times. And there's never been a time where I'm like, oh, I totally got this. I think that's a good thing. I really do. Because if you think you got this, you're not understanding that every employer is different. They have different needs. They perceive different things differently. It's good to be a little nervous about a job search. At least I feel that way. And the reason is that means you want the job. And when I interview people, and I interview people all the time, when they come in with just an edge of, this is exciting, this is new, this is a challenge that I'm taking on, it means that they want this job, they're interested in working here, or at least learning more about the position. So give yourself a break. If you're nervous about this, that's okay. We're here to help you get prepared. I say it's okay to be nervous. It's not okay not to be prepared. And that's what an employer is looking for. So some good news. And I have seen this over and over and over again from employers personally, but the pandemic has created a new demand for older workers. And this is something that came out of the Harvard Business Review. Employers have, it's true, historically viewed the group older workers of potential employees with some skepticism, and these concerns have faded during the crisis. And the reason for that is we used to say, this is probably in the early 2000s, that people change jobs every 3 to 5 years. People change jobs more often than that. I see it on a daily basis. Older workers don't. As I'm not saying as a rule, but generally, they stick with work longer. The cost of hiring a new employee is really expensive for employers. It's a frustrating process on their end too. As someone who has to post jobs and interview and make offers and train someone, it's a long process. I want to invest in someone who gives me the idea or the perception that they have some stability in their life, that they may see this as a a midterm solution. And even if it's writing out this potential job until you retire, if someone will give me as much time as they have, I'm going to invest in that person. So an older worker I look at differently than I did, 15, 20 years ago. The other thing is older workers generally bring along some institutional knowledge, work experience, mature perspective, and that's huge, and some stable life situations. And I'll give you an example of this. I talked to my son 2 days ago, actually, and he put in his 2-week notice, and he said, Dad, I just got to tell you, I just put in my 2-week notice, and my manager, I thought he'd be really irritated. He was thrilled. He said, in the 4 years he's had his business, he was the first person that put in a 2-week notice. Everyone else had just quit. My son's a younger person. He's 22 years old. Older workers generally will give notice, and employers are seeing the benefit of that. So think about it. There are some real benefits of being an older workers. They're going to give you some assumed knowledge, some assumed perspective on what it means to show up for work. So there are some benefits. So what has changed since you last looked for work? Well, of course, that depends on when you last looked for work. If you last looked for work a year ago, maybe not much has changed. But if you're coming off of a long-term position and you're looking for work for the first time in a long time, you might notice that quite a bit has changed. So here's some of the things. First, matching your skills to the skills listed. If you get nothing else out of today's presentation, I want you to really, really dive into this. When I started doing this in the late 90s, early 2000s, we still had a situation where people were creating one resume, making like 100 copies of that, and using that to apply for every position they were interested in. That worked in the past. And the reason it did is because what they were asking for was pretty minimal. Think about, let me ask this question. Let's say in the 90s or 80s or even the early 2000s, where did people look for work? Try to think back. Give me one word or 2 words of where did people look for work? Just go ahead and type it into the chat. Newspaper, classified ads. Thank you so much. Some of us still remember that. I guess I'm talking to the right crowd. So when I was doing worked for a placement agency, we had a paper that we put on and people would look through that paper. The reason it's changed so much is in a paper you paid for, as an employer, you paid for every word you put in. So you may say something for like seeking a experienced mill worker or seeking an experienced accountant, apply at ABC Accounting. It costs thousands of dollars in the Twin Cities, at least, to put a Sunday ad in for a simple position. Nowadays, we look for work in a variety of methods, and one of those methods is online. They charge per posting, not per word, so they can ask for the moon. Because they ask for the moon, we now have to, at least in some way, respond specifically to what they're asking for. So in the past, we may have defined in our own words what experienced accountant meant. Now they're telling us what it means. And because they're telling us what it means, we just need to respond with the words they use. Before we get on to our next bullet, I see Naquila has her camera on. Is there a question we need to get to, Naquila?
Yes, there is. There's actually a few here that I wanted to address before we move on. There was one here that asks how to deal with age discrimination.
Yeah, so that's one of the big questions. So the first thing is, and may not like this answer, how do we know it's age discrimination? I have dealt with this in the past many times. I have had situations in which someone thought they were being discriminated against because of their age. Um, we don't know. We honestly don't. If it's an actual issue, you really have to think about, what am I presenting? Why are they perceiving that I'm too old to do this work? It's usually not that I'm too old. It's that I don't have current skills or I don't fit in with the industry. So what I try to do is try to think of what's needed to do this work. At interview is the only time you can really have a good idea. I mean, if you get to interview and you're getting the body language, or maybe they even talk to you and say something, there are anti-discrimination laws in place. There are complaints you can make. But in most cases, I always look at it as, if that person doesn't want to hire me because of how old I am, that's not a good situation for me to be in. Does anyone know who the largest employer in the state of Minnesota is? Anyone want to take a guess? The state, yes. 37 to 38,000 people are employed by the state. As someone who is very knowledgeable about the hiring process, we would be silly to discriminate against someone for age, not because it's immoral, not because it's illegal, but because that's some of our best candidates. And I can tell you 100%, that's not something we look at. I know most employers don't, but it is something that's in the back of every job seeker's mind when they get older. It's tough. I would have a one-on-one conversation with somebody and say, here are my concerns. Here are my concerns. Here's what I've experienced. And then we can look at it if that's truly age discrimination or if that's effective marketing. We'll take one more question, then we'll have to jump into the content.
Then the next one that I have here, how do you answer a question on a application for a reason that the job has ended when you were terminated after 9 years?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's one of the toughest ones, but I got a much easier answer for that one. So on the application, and we'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later on. If you were fired, if you were terminated, think about how powerful those words are, how negative they are. You don't want to say you were laid off. You don't want to say that you quit when you were fired, because trust me, they will find out. And if you lied about it on the application, it will affect your potential chances with that employer. You don't go into excessive details. All I do on there is I say involuntary separation. And you might say, well, that's wordsmithing. That's, that's just using fancy words. Trust me, words matter. Involuntary separation could have a ton of different things behind it. They will ask you about it. They may ask you about it in the interview itself. But more than any time in my entire career, employers don't care. As long as you didn't commit a crime, they're going to do background checks. They're going to do reference checks. And they may ask about your former employer, ask if they can talk to your former employer. You don't have to go into great detail, but you do have to answer that question. So if you were fired, I would just put involuntary separation. So networking, the big thing that's changed is the options for networking. You may not be someone who wants to get onto LinkedIn. I get that. I understand that. But you may be someone who likes to put pictures of grandkids on Facebook. That's networking. Using networking, online networking, gives you a bigger reach. You can connect with your entire network if you're purposeful about it. Just letting people you know, who like you, who trust you, that you're looking for work is easier than it's ever been before. And yes, it's a little uncomfortable, but you might want to say something like, hey, some of you may not have heard, I'm excited to be back in the job. I mean, I know this would be a bit of a lie, but I'm excited about the opportunities of going in a new career direction. I'm looking for any openings you have in whatever field you're in. Putting that out there allows people to help if they can. Okay, you're not saying do this for me. You're just saying I have a need. If they can fill it, if they can give you some ideas, they will. If not, no big deal. You can get into it as much as you're comfortable, or you can create a new comfort level by creating a LinkedIn account and being a little bit more proactive with your marketing, with your networking. Another thing is something that I've become extremely impressed with is doing something called informational interviews. Just having a chat with people who do the work that you would like to do, who work for a company that you would like to work for. Just having a cup of coffee, getting connected. It's outside most of our comfort levels, but so is job search. And the more you get uncomfortable, the shorter your job search generally is. And then teleconferencing. Here's a cool thing. You're doing it right now. And congratulations. If this is your first time on a webinar, you may have run into some stumbling blocks. You may have tried to get your audio to work. You may have not been able to get connected, but you worked through it. And congratulations for getting there. As much as you can practice with this, it's just going to lead to better outcomes when you get to the actual interview. I've done a lot of interviewing lately, and all of it has been online. That does not mean that in person no longer exists. It does. I like in person. I prefer in person, but it saves so much time and money for both parties to do it online that it's not going away. It was a need during the pandemic. Now it's just something that works too well for a lot of different people. So you may find yourself in a situation where you're teleconferencing. Here's the biggest tip I can give you on that. We'll have slides for each of these, but the biggest tip I can give you is if something goes wrong, that's okay. Things go wrong almost every single time I have a interview online. The audio doesn't work, someone couldn't get connected. It happens. Your ability to deal professionally with it, meaning that you apologize once and then you move on, says something about you. It's how you handle adversity, how you troubleshoot. You don't have to continuously apologize. Certainly don't get mad at them. I've had that happen. That's not a good look. And also, maybe just give them a call, give them a number. If we are not able to connect today, I wanted to give you my number so we could continue. I've had that save multiple interviews for people that actually got the job. Is it ideal? No, it's not ideal, but we deal with what the situation allows. And sometimes your internet's out. Sometimes the cell service is out. Sometimes you have to reschedule. Sometimes you're late. All those things can happen. Apologize once and then just do the best you can moving on. And then the other thing that's changed is you. If you're using the same exact marketing material, meaning the same resume that you used the last time you looked for work, and all you're doing is updating the dates, you're selling yourself short. You have more to offer than the last employer because you've experienced more situations, you've gained more skills, you've got more experience than you had last time. So think about what are those skills. Take a skills assessment. We're going to be sending everyone a really nice skills assessment you can take right on careerforcemn.com that'll give you some ideas. It'll ask you what kind of work you've done in the past, and it'll talk about some of the skills inherent within that type of work. That does not mean they're specifically something you did. Make sure it's something you did, but it'll give you some ideas. And always understand that an employer rarely knows what you did at your last job unless you tell them. So it may seem like to you, oh, everyone in my line of work does that. They don't know that. They don't know to level you did it. They don't know how many times you did it. So while it may seem really simple and not worth mentioning to you, it may be very impressive to them. So let's talk about the T-table or T-chart. And this is sometimes used within a cover letter format. You may see it occasionally in some templates for cover letters. I think of it here as just a tool for us to help kind of flesh out our relatable skills or what we call transferable skills to a particular opportunity or a job posting. So I just take a white piece of paper or any kind of paper, scratch paper, and I put a T on it. I use a pen or a pencil. And on the left-hand side, I put in bulleted items from the job listing. Now, there may be a ton. I've seen some ridiculous job postings. Some of the stuff is copy and paste for every single job they post. Some of it may seem like it's nothing you have to respond to, but based on your knowledge of the industry, of that type of work, put the most important items on the left-hand side. So if this were like an HR position, it might be recruiting team members, business partners, and working with various departments to determine candidate skills. Okay, so those are what they're looking for. On the right-hand side, you put or start putting together what we call skills statements that talk about how you've done that for a past employer. So normally it's in the past tense unless it's a current job you're doing. So instead of saying, I've recruited team members, you could say, exceeded all recruitment goals by attending job fairs and sourcing new applicants through various job boards, from various job boards. So not only you're saying that you've done it, you're saying how you've done it, because that's important. If at all possible, it's a good idea within, let's say, a grouping of bullets, and by bullets, I mean these little things that have a little dot next to them, to put numbers in one of the bullets. Numbers stand out on a resume. They give scope to something, and they help to prove something to the effect we can. So it's one thing to say something, it's another thing to prove something or give the results of something or to give a time frame. So if they're saying experience as a human resource partner, you could say industry standard acronyms, PHR, professional human resources, certified HR professional with over 15 years of experience. We talked just a little bit about acronyms. If they're used within the job posting, feel free to use them. If they're industry standard but they're not in the posting, you may want to put the acronym, the PHR, and then in parentheses, professional human resources. When in doubt, I like to put it spelled out, just because I don't know who's going to be watching this. You're going to have to make that determination based on the job you're applying for. And then this other one works with various departments. Collaborated. That's a big key, by the way. Everyone's looking for someone who can collaborate, because that means you work well within a group. And people who work well within a group generally are better team members or better employees. So let's talk a little bit about networking here. First off, you want to learn from people who are doing the work you want to do. So do you know anyone who does that type of work? So for career changers, if you're looking to get into a new line of work, and that's quite often what happens, because if the old line of work were still available, you'd probably still be doing that. Many people are leaving an industry or were let go from an industry because it's no longer as needed. So a lot of people are in a situation in which they are changing careers. One of the other assessments we have is a skill matching assessment. And what it does is it gives you the ability to put in the work you've done in the past with the work you would currently like to do. And it talks a little bit about what are the transferable skills between those two. Very few people that I know, and I'm one that's included in this, want to go back to school every single time we change jobs. We want to utilize the skills we currently have. We want to maybe upskill to what we have to do, but we don't want to maybe do a long-term investment in going back to get a new degree. So we have to see, do we have competitive skills for this new industry? Also, do you want this job? That's really important. Today's job search allows you to more quickly apply for jobs than ever before. I'm going to caution you on that. I'm not saying you have to wait for the perfect job to come out, but you should be at least interested in the job. Applying for every possible job under the sun, I don't think is a good idea. It's a waste of your time and it wastes the employer's time. If you're not interested in the job, I'd spend more time looking at jobs that you are interested in. I get it. Sometimes we just need a job. Perfectly okay, wherever you're at. But it's really important where we spend our time because we'll spend, 40 hours, 2,080 hours a year at that job. It's an important decision to make for you and the employer. People are not happy in their job, don't stay in the job. So an employer's looking for that. If you're not showing interest at interview, they may question whether you'll stay and whether they'll have to go through this whole process again. So also talking with people who do the work, people gives you insider tips. So I just told you something about the largest employer in the state. So I'm sure you've heard this before. Someone tell me in the chat, how many pages have you heard a resume should be? Has anyone gotten any guidance on that, on how many pages a resume should be? Let's see if it says in the chat here. Whoops, I gotta bring my chat over a little bit. And we'll get to some questions here, man. It says one or two max. Yep, that's what I say. And that's the guidance I would give. Did you know that the state of Minnesota that it doesn't matter as much. I'm not saying you do a 9-page resume, but if you have relevant skills needed for the job, I'd spend a little bit more space on that. And the reason for that is your salary determination is based on how many years of related experience you have. So the general rule of thumb is only give them what they need and they can learn more in the interview. If you have specific knowledge of an employer, you're going to get insider tips. And that's why it's important. If you can talk to someone who's done that type of work in the past or is doing that kind of work now, they can give you some tips to say, oh, don't do this when you're applying, or do this when you're applying. That's why it's important to network as much as possible. Naquila?
Hi there. And so we do have a few questions that
Mhm.
I did want to address. One of them is, how do you convey the wisdom that you've gained through the years that will help you in any role?
So this is one of you respond to the questions they ask, okay? And I want to be very careful about that. One of the very true things about an older worker is, in many cases, we have more knowledge, more skills, more experience than the job requires. When you are talking about conveying your wisdom of years, you can do that, but be careful that it's in line with the questions they ask you, because offer information that they're not asking for, they're going to wonder, is this the right fit for you? Meaning, will you stay in this position? And that's that whole overqualified thing. So think about the questions that are asked. What is relevant for them to know of your past experience? And really cool thing is you're more likely to have related work experience than any other group of job seeker. Just be very, very careful and very specific that you only talk about what their needs are. Don't talk about things you did outside the scope of the position or the questions they've asked.
All right. And then we do have another question that I wanted to go over here now. Um, this job seeker did mention that they have worked in a remote position in the past.
Mhm.
But so moving forward, how difficult is it to find a remote position for someone that is over 60 years old?
Um, I I wouldn't I don't want to say it's still here. Okay. As part of the pandemic, of course, many employers, myself included, had to really convert to remote work because it was the only option for some. Some had to work, at location the entire time. Um, for those of you that were remote, I totally understand you wanting to, have the convenience, the benefits of working a remote position. They still exist. Be very careful about reading the job posting. Some will say up to so many days remote, 1 day in office. We are starting to get a pushback from employers that are requiring staff to come back into the office, and that's a big struggle. But there's some employers that see this as, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity. We don't require someone to be in. We can mine from that field of people who are willing to do remote work. So in answer to your question, there are a lot of remote jobs out there. But if you are searching based on remote, it's really important that you let them know how you can do this job from home, meaning that I have set up my work schedule I have set up my office so that I can focus on my workday. Here's how I've successfully done this in the past. Because during the pandemic, we had a lot of people that I'm sure you've experienced it. Maybe you needed to do customer service and on a line, and some kid walked across the screen, or you heard a dog barking. That's just what we had to do. We're going back to more of the, do you have an office space set up? Notice that I have a background here. Um, if you're interviewing from home, which most people would be doing, that's something to show that, hey, I understand what a professional image looks like when I'm at home. There's certain things you can do. You can also filter by remote work on many of the job boards. And the other thing I do is I search for keywords, remote work. That's what I do on Minnesota Works, even though there's an option for filter. So yes, long-winded answer for a short question. There is remote work out there. Just be very specific on how you can do the work from home when you're answering their questions. All right, can we maybe take one more and then we'll move on, Aquila?
Sure. All right. So the next one that I have here, how do you deal with having several interviews with a company and then the company completely ghosts you?
Okay. So I'll tell you my personal experience. I've interviewed the same candidate 3 times, and I hired them the 3rd time. We never know what the situation is with a company. If I interview with a company 3, 4 times and I don't get any offers, I may ask for some feedback. In fact, I would ask the first one. I've done that. One of the best interview I've ever taken part of in my entire life was with a large employer. And I, to this day, wouldn't have changed one thing about that interview. And I didn't get the job. I was shocked, actually. I asked for feedback. I asked for, is there anything I left off the table? Is there anything I could do better? Now, they may not give you feedback. They may say, no, we can't do that, but they may. And the only way you're going to know is if you ask. Always ask with the intent of improving, not with the intent of a gotcha. Because if you give any negativity during that ask, like, I want you to explain to me why you didn't hire me. I didn't see anything wrong. I think I'm highly qualified. They're not going to give you any information. In fact, you probably have messed up your chances with that company because you're coming off as extremely negative. We don't know what their situation is. They could have had an internal candidate. That may be how they hire, but they are required to post it externally because of grants they receive or funding, whatever. I've been on both sides of that. It's just part of doing business. We never know what their situation is, whether they have an internal candidate or not. I always look at every interview as a win because it's an opportunity for me to talk about myself for an hour to an hour and a half with an employer I want to work for. At some point, is it not worth my effort anymore? Absolutely. I'm not going to keep interviewing with a company that doesn't give me an opportunity, but I should ask. I should ask before I close that door, because we don't know what's going on within that company. All right. Let's move on to the next slide here. The other thing is, here's the other side of that coin. So if you interview with a company, and the company I'm talking about, this was the exact situation, didn't get the job, very frustrated, but I tried to be as professional, as positive as I could about it. I asked them for some feedback. They actually gave it to me, which gave me some, they had an internal candidate. And while part of me thought I wasted a whole bunch of time and I took a day off work for this, the other part of me thought, hey, they know who I am now. Once they know who you are, here's the cool thing. You can find jobs that no one has posted yet. Some jobs are required to be posted, but sometimes now you're the person they're thinking of when they post the job. If you're a known commodity with that company, you have an inside edge. You have a leg up on other competition who they haven't met yet because you've already created some momentum with that company. Again, do you keep doing that, going to that well over and over and over again with no results? Probably not, but I would give it a shot. I would think about it as my first interview was an introduction. My second interview could have been an internal candidate. I'll try again. I always give it kind of the 3 strikes, 3 opportunities. If it's important not to be mono-focused on just one company, though, because if you just think that I only want to work at this one company, you end up applying for a ton of jobs with that company, and then they may begin to question, they just want to work here. There's no particular job they're really looking for. You can't tell me why you want to do the job. I question how long you're going to stay, because then it's just about the wage. I know your probably gut reaction to that is it's all about the wage. Of course, I wouldn't work for someone unless they paid me to do it. Employers know that. They want to know the second reason you want to work there. Why do you want to get paid to work at this job? And if you're applying for every job under the sun, there's really no connection you can say to here's why I want to do this job, because you're applying to a ton of jobs. So you got to kind of diversify. You know, look at different job boards, look at different opportunities. You may have a top choice, obviously, but I always think of having 5 employers that I'm interested in so that I'm not putting all my effort into one employer. Because that employer could close, and then you have no momentum going with any additional employers. And you want to create relationships so that it will think of you first when something comes up, and that's what I had just talked about. All right, let's talk about teleconferencing or, you know, attending webinars, doing remote interviews. First thing is you're doing it right now, as I has described. Second thing, set up your background. I was a big believer in just having a good natural background. I still am. Obviously, today I don't have one, so I have the fake background. Test that out. I'll tell you one thing, on my view, when I'm looking at the other screen where it says Career Force, in fact, it shows up here on me. I think it shows up there for you. It's backwards. Test it out. If at all possible, do a mock interview with someone from Career Force. We can set that up with you. There's one-on-one appointments throughout the state of Minnesota. You can do a mock interview and say, hey, I just wanted you to ask me 5 questions so you can give me some feedback on how my background looks, on how my audio is coming through. If you've got an important interview coming up, absolutely utilize the Career Force system to help you prep for it. You can also do it with friends. You can also do it from your phone to your computer so you can see what it looks like on both ends. Test it. Choose good lighting. I've used my daughter's, I don't know what you call them, Instagram lighting, or those circular $20 circular makeup lights or whatever. They work wonders. Or just kind of experiment on what the lighting looks like. Dress as you would for a face-to-face. I am seeing more and more people dress down a little bit. So I'm not saying you have to have a like a suit and tie or a brand new set of clothes. It's new to them, just something that looks professional for the type of work you're looking for. So make it, if you're applying for a maintenance custodial position, which I've done, which I've trained for, you're still not going to want to dress as maybe you would on the job. You're going to dress in just a nice button-up shirt and wear the pants, have good pants on too. You'd be surprised how many times people have to stand up in an interview because they have to reconnect something. And I've seen people like in shorts and stuff, and I wouldn't do that during an interview. Assume they're going to see the whole you, and you just feel more confident if you're dressed professionally. So dress as you would for face-to-face. Make good eye contact. So my camera is right up here. I also have a camera that could have been over here. If I were doing my entire meeting with you by looking over at this other screen, there wouldn't be the connection there. So make sure that you experiment to see what works or how you can make the best eye contact with your camera. And every situation is different. You can actually do an interview on your phone, but what I did, see if you can see this here. I spent like $5 on something like this. It's just a little foldable phone thing. And I put my phone on it because there's times I have to take meetings when I'm on the phone. It's very frustrating to be on a interview when someone's holding their phone because it goes all over the place. Phones can have excellent cameras. You can do it. It is somewhat limiting on kind of the screens and your notes and that sort of thing. But just make sure it's in a stationary position and then it's facing you. And then make sure your audio is good. Notice we did a couple of audio checks before we met with you today. Notice that I'm wearing these headphones. I do have a speaker. I do have a microphone. I have multiple other setups. I bought these personally, by the way, but I have some very expensive headphones that I got for Christmas. I didn't spend, my wife did. The microphone's not good on them. So I test that out and I say, well, okay, I always ask, does this sound okay? These $20 cheap headphones seem to be the best for me. Your situation may be different. And then have a backup phone number handy. Not a bad idea to respond to the interview request by saying, here is a phone number that I can be reached at if we run into any issues. And just an interview I did a couple weeks ago, we had to do that. And trust me, it's far better than saying, oh, I'm sorry, I can't complete this interview, could reschedule. You're asking sometimes 3-4 people to reschedule. I'd much rather go with it with what you have. It really shows that you can deal with adversity and that you can troubleshoot. And then the other thing is you've changed. How do you feel about looking for employment now, and do those feelings show? You may be very frustrated. I understand that. It cannot show during an interview, especially if maybe it's your third time interviewing with an employer. You may be like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get this job. I've failed twice. It's not failure to not get a job. I know employers that interview 10 people for a position. I generally interview 5, but even think at 5, you've got a 20% chance of getting that job if all other things are equal. That means you probably have to go on 5 interviews to get one offer. That's fairly natural. I know it's frustrating. I'd like to get the job offer at the first interview, but be aware that if you keep applying for positions, if you keep trying to improve your presentation, think about what went well and what didn't go well right after the interview and write it down. If you need some help, reach out. We can figure out better ways of working through tricky questions. Maybe a question you had never thought they would answer for and you weren't prepared for it. That's fine. People mess up on questions all the time. If you don't get a job offer, work at improving it. So you've changed. Make sure that what your marketing changes and how you market it. And to kind of do just a check with yourself, kind of recenter yourself before the interview and say, hey, during this point right now, the frustrations of my past employment need to be put on the shelf. I'm just dealing with the people in front of me that I'm meeting for the first time who know nothing about me and my situation. And I want to give them the information they need to hire me if they have the ability to do so. Again, if you haven't gotten anything new to market yourself, work on creating something new, especially if you've been unemployed for a while. So one of the things I do on a consistent basis is I go online and I look for free trainings. One of the ones I'm going to be sending everyone is GCF Learn Free. It's Goodwill Community Foundations. Has anyone ever been on gcflearnfree.org? Just a yes or no in the chat box. No, nope. Oh, there we go. I just added value to this. This is a no, there's no viruses on this. There's no ads on this. This is 100% funded by Goodwill Community Foundation. It is an awesome website that gives you training on a lot of the computer programs like Excel and Word and PowerPoint that you may need some brushing up on if it's part of the work you may be doing. So for an employer who looks at someone with a gap in work history, happens all the time, by the way, and it's less of an issue than it's ever been before. I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it's less of an issue than it's ever been before. All they're looking for is, what have you been doing since your last position? There's a big difference between saying I've been looking for work and I've been taking this opportunity to refresh my skills in Excel, or I went to a dislocated worker process and I got my boilers license, so now I can work on high pressure boilers within a maintenance custodial position. Think about what can you be doing during this time you're looking for work to show that you've been working on upskilling or refreshing your skills. Based on your industry, that's gonna be different. If you haven't looked into the dislocated worker program, it's just a program that's available to people who are unemployed through no fault of their own. If you were let go through no fault of your own, meaning you weren't terminated for cause, you were laid off or whatever, there may be training dollars available for you to take some short-term trainings or get some additional assistance. We'll put the link for more information on that within our follow-up email that we send. But a lot of these things can also be done just by looking on the internet, looking for free trainings. And I take advantage of that as often as I can. And then what makes you a better candidate today than you were last time? One is experience. You know, the last time you applied, you've gained knowledge since then. It really is tough to think off the top of your head what you've gained. So make sure you're writing these things down. Sometimes it's just great to have a conversation with a friend or family member and talk about what you do. You know, I always think about this. My dad worked for a company for 45 years, 45 years. And until I asked, I had no idea what he did. I had no idea what he actually did on a day-to-day basis. When I took the time to ask him, I was very impressed with the scope of all the skills he had developed through those decades of working for this company. And until you start talking about it, you don't even know really what you have to market about yourself. Maybe you manage some people. Maybe you were a foreman. Maybe you, ran some safety meetings. Maybe you put together a presentation. Those are all skills you can market. Niquila, it looks like we got some questions.
Yes, it does look like this question had came up a few times in the chat. Let me just go ahead and get to it here. All right, and so the question that we have here, how do you find legit remote positions, and how can you decipher whether they are fake, scams, or just even valid positions to
Sure.
apply for?
Yep. One, and I'm not saying this just because I work for the state, but MinnesotaWorks.net has some real benefits, and one of the benefits is all the employers are vetted, meaning that we call every employer that wants to post a job. When they create an account, we make sure that they're a valid employer. So to the best of our ability, you're going to see far less fake jobs on Minnesota Works than other ones. I'm not saying you just use Minnesota Works. Indeed, Glassdoor. I know people who get great job opportunities off Craigslist, but you're much more likely to potentially get scams off Craigslist too. So you've got to be very cautious about it. I do my research. If I see a job posting, I try to find out exactly where that company is, where they're located. You can do a pretty decent, just basic web search on them. And if you're applying for remote jobs, they could be out of state. And yes, there are some scams out there, but the research you do is really going to let you know whether it's worth investing your time and effort into applying for that position and giving your personal information out there. Another thing you could do is, if you really question, set up a quick meeting with one of the career force representative and see if we have any information. We can maybe help you vet that employer a little bit and see if we have any additional information. I've seen some things that look very scammy that were actually great opportunities that just kind of put off a red flag for me. And it's like, oh, this doesn't look right. And then found out it was just a poorly written posting. And then another thing you can do is you can, and I recommend you do this if at all possible, reach out to the employer with your questions. They make it hard to do that. And the reason is they don't want to talk to a ton of people, everyone who's interested, but someone who can actually get to someone says to that employer, I'm really interested in this position. I've gone above and beyond to make sure I'm putting together the correct presentation materials, meaning your resume and cover letter. I've had that lead to impromptu interviews with some fairly large companies. You'll also hear a lot of, please follow our procedure. I get that. But if you have questions, you're offering your time, which is the most important thing we have to offer anybody. It's a two-way street. You need to ask them questions as well. And if you're questioning whether it's a legit job, do your research, call somebody and make sure. Be professional about it, be positive about it, but it's a really good idea to make sure that you're only giving your personal information to valid employers. We can take one more question before we kind of finish up with our material.
So the next question that we have here, what advice do you have for people that are re-entering the workforce to help explain a larger gap between employment?
Just be able to, if they ask, and by the way, they don't ask as much as they used to. In fact, I don't ask. As long as you have the skills I'm looking for, I don't question why you've been out of work for any period of time. What used to be a huge issue is far less of an issue now. And you're only going to be able to explain that in the interview. So if it's on the resume, you might want to talk about things you've done in between. The example I always give, and she probably hates that I do this, is my mom. My mom was an accountant, and for a time when I was growing up, she stayed at home and did not do that work. And during that time, however, she was the bookkeeper for the VFW auxiliary. She was worked for the PTA to do tutoring. So there was a lot of things she was doing during that layoff that she could market as relevant skills, that she was keeping up her skills and doing the work. She just wasn't being paid for it. Be very careful on how you put that on a resume. However, there's a lot of things we do in our daily life that we could market about ourselves. And if not, you're starting today. If not, start today. Take the link I give you in the follow-up information and start looking into trainings that might be available. Now, I'm not saying you go out and do some volunteer work while you're looking for work, but if you've done volunteer work, think of the transferable skills. Think of the organizations you're a part of. And if none of that's been happening, which I would doubt, most people have a lot of things they could talk about. Start thinking about trainings you could start today. And I'm not saying 8 hours a day. I'm saying 15, 20 minutes a day that could upskill you to the current needs of the employer. And then what are your goals? You know, your goals have changed. One of the biggest questions, which we haven't gotten, which I'm surprised we haven't gotten, because almost every single time I run this, this question is asked, is how, when an employer says, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Well, what if I see myself retired in 5 years? That's one of the more difficult questions to answer for people, and that question is tricky. And that's when I really would recommend you kind of wordsmith that with based on your situation on a one-on-one basis. But you need to give an employer the idea that for the immediate future, you're in a stable situation, you're looking for work. If you really only need a job for a very short period of time, of course an employer wants to filter those people out, because it takes 6 to 12 months just to get someone trained in to do the work. There are temp positions that are available through staffing agencies that might meet your needs. Everyone's situation is different. I can't give kind of a boilerplate answer to that question, but it's something you should be aware of. It's a question that is quite often asked, and you should have an answer for it that you're comfortable with. Now, you may say, well, I don't know what questions they're going to ask me. There's pretty basic questions. If you just go online and say, top 20 questions asked in an interview, if you've got answers for those questions, they may ask them slightly differently, but they're not going to reinvent the wheel. They're not going to ask you any crazy questions that aren't going to assist them. They ask standard questions, and then they ask industry specific questions, which would deal with the knowledge you have. And those are just you either know it or you don't. But a lot of the questions they ask are standard questions, like how do you deal with adversity? When have you had a disagreement with a coworker? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? The biggest one that's asked, and you should prepare for, it's asked almost all the time, is tell me a little bit about your past work history as it relates to this position. They may say it as, just tell me a little bit about yourself. I rephrase it in my mind as, tell me about your past work history as it relates to this position. The reason is, I could go on for days telling you about myself. That's not going to do me any good. It's not going to give them the information they need. So I always think of it as, what have I done that they need to know about? That's going to give me a better shot. They ask the question, but we have more power in that we give them the information we want them to know based on our answer. And you got a lot more leeway than you think there if you're prepared. So think about, what do they need to know for me to get this job? And then create stories around your experience that relates to their needs and work them into your answers to the questions, because the questions are pretty broad. There's a lot of leeway for you to go in a lot of different directions. Go in a direction that benefits you. So here's some mistakes that are commonly made. Being seen as overqualified, talking about things that don't relate to the needs of the position, talking about things like where you managed a group of 20 individuals. You may be very proud of that, and rightfully so. But if the job doesn't require any supervisory, don't talk about it, because it's going to make them wonder if you can take direction. Losing momentum, just kind of going through the motions after a while. I get it. We're all there. If you need a pep talk, reach out to us, talk to us about, some of the struggles, and, look for solutions, look for new ways of marketing yourself, new organizations to market to. And then letting your narrative be negative. I have seen more people self-defeat in an interview than I could talk about in an hour and a half. If you come in negative, that's your narrative. If you talk poorly about a past employee, a past coworker, a past organization that you worked for, I'm assuming at interview, I'm seeing you at the very best. If you're talking negatively in the interview, I assume that's going to come into this position. So even if you're asked about, a situation in which you had to deal with someone you disagreed with, talk about what steps you took to improve the situation. And if you say, well, no, in that situation, it was all that person's fault and they were fired, and well, then don't use that example. Use an example in which you were able to work professionally to improve the situation to better outcomes. That's not the first example that comes to mind when someone asks what I call a presumptive negative question. When they ask you about a bad situation, you're going to think about what emotionally resonates with you. When your feelings were hurt, when you felt disrespected, doesn't really give you any benefits to talk about that situation. So be prepared for thinking about situations in which you were able to solve problems. I love this term. Solve more problems than you create. That's who they want to hire. Someone who solves more problems than they create. And then not updating your skills. That's a huge mistake. If you are stuck, I took Pascal programming back in the 80s. If they're looking for a computer programmer, it's going to be very obvious that I haven't updated my skills. And why would they be interested in me? Update your skills to the best of your ability. Seek additional resources like the Dislocated Worker Program if it's outside of the scope of what you can find for free. And talk about it. Talk about what you've been doing in the last, while you've been unemployed. And then just adding a little bit to the being seen as overqualified, listing too many accomplishments or unrelated accomplishments. Remember that your resume, you have tons of things you could put on a resume. Most of us here could write a 20-page resume. Focus it on the needs of the employer, and even past that, probably more than we can list there. Focus on the most important or most impressive accomplishments that are required by the employer. Also, during the interview, make sure you're listening. Make sure you answer the question they asked. You don't want to behave like you did when you were in charge, because you may be reporting to this person and they want to make sure that you're someone who can take direction. That's quite often someone who is seen as overqualified is seen as someone who cannot take direction, also because they've been in a position of power. And then finally, just losing momentum. It can be a long struggle. It can take much longer than you want it to get that next job. But I guarantee you, if you think of job seeking as a skill in and of itself, and you're doing it today, and congratulations for spending an hour this morning. I know we're at time here. This is maybe just the first step. This might be part of a long process, but take that next step. Get your resume reviewed by someone at a Career Force location. Do a mock interview. Maybe create a LinkedIn account, or put yourself there out on Facebook, or call an old friend that you used to work with and have coffee. Get outside your comfort zone a little bit, and that's going to give you a little bit more momentum. I want to thank you very much for spending this time. Great questions today. If you have additional questions that we weren't able to get to, we'll put the location finder so you can find the location closest to you to get some one-on-one attention. I want to wish you the very best of luck in your job search. Remember, we have more skills to offer than we probably even know ourselves. That's a benefit of being an older worker. Keep with it, keep the momentum, and I know you can get to that next level and that next stage in your career. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.